Well, welcome everyone to the Ohio Family Leadership Summit. My name is Marcy Cam, and I'm going to be moderating this session today, which is session number 11. And joining us today, we have Dr. Gabrielle Johnson, Dee Marks, Monica McCain, and Susan Sweeney. To ensure that we get the most out of today, we do ask that all participants turn off their webcams and their microphones. If you have questions for the presenter, you can either put them in the chat and we'll try and answer them in the chat, or we may save them to the end when we can all open it up for questions and answers from everyone. You can also join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag Ohio OH Summit 23 to share your thoughts. And with that, I will pass it over to our team, Dr. Johnson.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're so happy to have you and so grateful that you were able to join us today for this discussion. Based on just our preparation and practice, I'm excited for the practical strategies that I believe that you all will walk away with today. So our presentation today is Student Voice Matters, Best Practices for Engaging Students in Their Special Education Journey. And as Marcy sort of introed, I'm joined today by several of my colleagues from the Ohio Parent Mentor Project. I work for the Ohio State University Center on Education and Training for Employment, but I have the honor and privilege of serving as the program director for the Ohio Parent Mentor Project, which you'll hear a little bit more about later. And so I will toss it to Monica to introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Monica McCain. I am parent mentor for Toledo Public Schools up in Northwestern Ohio.
And Dee?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dee Marks. I'm a parent mentor for Dublin City Schools. Susan?
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Sweeney. I am the parent mentor for Clark County.
All right. So this morning, I do want to start with just some learning objectives to center us all around the subject matter for today. This is really what we believe that you'll be able to walk away with following our session today. So our goal, first of all, is that you understand the role of student voice and effective engagement of families navigating special education. So we're going to really center all of our strategies and practices around this idea of how do we include student voice in family engagement. We hear a lot about family engagement and how to invite the family in and all of those strategies, but we'll talk really about the student voice component in that and how you can capitalize on that. We also hope that you walk away with an increased awareness of the barriers to the engagement of students with disabilities in their educational journey. So we'll talk about their unique barriers, things that they experience, things that we may be aware of, or in some cases we may not be aware of. And then lastly, we hope that you'll be able to articulate practical strategies and opportunities to enhance student participation in major milestones of special education. So even though you'll notice a few different topics and maybe some different examples that we share, we are very intentional in this particular presentation about some of those major milestones of special education, including eligibility, the IEP process, and transition planning. So we're going to start off with a little bit of an interactive activity. This one is just going to be a test screen to make sure that we all figure out how to use it. So if you haven't used annotation before, you can look down at your bar across the bottom of the screen, and there is a button called Annotate. If you click that, you should have this bar kind of like what it looks like on the screen. The stamp works really well, a little bit better than draw. So if you click that stamp check mark right here, let's see if I can point to it right here. And then on a scale of 1 to 10, how was your week? Just drop your stamp anywhere along the line. Let us know. On a scale of 1 to 10, how was your week? There we go. Oh, we've had mostly, okay, between 5 and 10, that's a good thing. I love that. I wonder if it's because of the amazing fall weather. At least over here in Ohio, we've got some good fall weather going. I love this. This may be the first time that I've done this and everything was between 5 and 10 or mostly. We'll give you a few more seconds. Again, this one is just to figure out, so if you can't find annotation or if you're having some trouble, let us know. Okay, awesome. It looks like you all are figuring it out. So I love that. We will move on to the next screen. Actually, let me go ahead and, okay, we're gonna clear this one. And go on to the next screen. So this one is an actual activity. How involved or included are your students in their special education journey? So think about times where you've sought student input and feedback in the process, or evaluation team meetings, IEP. That's the frame of reference for this kind of conversation. So how involved would you say in your practice are students in their special education journey? Okay, I'm seeing quite a few sometimes, quite a few in the barely at all. I see the answers in the chat as well. Thank you for those who were able to get it last screen. Also, feel free to drop your answer in the chat if you're having trouble with the annotation. Okay, I see someone is a little between sometimes and often. That's good to know. Okay. So it looks like most of us are falling in that barely at all or sometimes category. Some kind of getting toward the often, but not quite there yet. Okay. All right. So that's good. That means you're in the right place today. And I hope we give you, again, some practical strategies to make sure that you are off to the right start with that. Oh, I do see some comments in the chat. I'll read really quickly. Amy Beam shared, we include our older students, but the younger ones are rarely included in the conversation. Parents, of course, but wish it was more student-led. Yes. Michael Fox, I work with K through 3, so the kids aren't really involved at all. They are involved in some of their behavior plans and things like that, but not with the IEP. Good to know. All right, thank you for indulging us in the annotate activity. I'm going to clear the screen and let's go ahead and get started. So today's title and subject matter really comes directly from the Partnering with Families Through Special Education research brief. This was released in 2022, and it was co-authored by myself, Dr. Kenyana Walker, Kiana Johnson, and Barbara Boone with the Family Engagement Center. And so what we did here was did a literature review and ended up with 30 research studies that we summarized in this research brief. On the subject of seven strategies that we said this is what the literature is saying, that these 7 strategies are really essential for family engagement around special education. And so that research brief is available. As you see, Marcy Cam just dropped the link to that research brief if you want to go ahead and check that out either while we're talking or later on. But today we're focusing in on that strategy 6. Which is supporting children and youth in their family engagement. So again, a lot of practical strategies there, but today we'll be focusing in on strategy 6. So one of the things that we highlighted within the research brief was starting with this idea of centering our minds around family engagement, just in general. What does that mean and how does that really apply to the special education process? And so there were 3 family engagement frameworks that we centered our conversation around. So we started off the research brief kind of going over those frameworks and again, talking about how they apply to the conversation around partnering with families through special education. But there was something that we noted about all 3 of those frameworks is that they were centered around student voice, student inclusion, and student achievement. So again, this idea that family engagement is not fully effective if the student voice is not incorporated into the conversation and into decision making. So I pulled out some notes here. The dual capacity framework really was on the necessity of building the capacity of both families and educators in their partnership to positively impact student achievement. Huber Dempsey and Sandler model talked about the ultimate outcome is student self-efficacy, intrinsic motivation, and self-regulation skills. You'll see a lot of that kind of tone and thread throughout a lot of the strategies that the parent mentors will share about things they do in their practice. That's the ultimate goal, is that we don't want the student to have to depend on us for forever, but also we want these decisions that we make along the way to be relevant for the student, to be something that the student recognizes and is excited about. The Sunshine model of trusting family professional partnerships really highlights how families and professionals in educational settings rely on one another to foster belonging and resilience for students. So again, all centered around the student conversation. And then lastly, if you look at the national core competencies of family engagement, there's one that stuck out to me in particular that I think is very relevant to this conversation. And it's collaborating for learning. So competency 5 is co-construct learning opportunities with families. And it really states that family engagement models are designed to assist educators and families in considering the most collaborative and effective ways to support school-age children and youth. So again, we're really fostering these collaborative strategies that we can't do it without one link in the chain. The students are really necessary. The student and their unique needs are centered in these models and are critical to the application of the models in practice. So they should be considered active participants in school and family engagement. And so that's, again, just some context to center our minds around why this conversation even matters, why we're even finding it necessary to make sure that students are part of their special education journey. So we're going to, again, talk about some practical ways and what that looks like across the years, not just for our older students. I saw a lot of comments about that. So I'm going to turn it over to the true experts, the people who are out working with our students and doing this work every day in special education. And so first person I'm going to toss it to is Dee Marks.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Although that we know that students are essential to family engagement, schools may not take an in-depth look at what may impede families from participating in all aspects of their child's educational journey. Today, I'd like for us to explore some of the barriers together in the hopes that by identifying them, we can make a difference moving forward. Let's think about the adults. Parents have a wealth of knowledge about their child, a treasure trove which opens so many doors in regards to meeting the needs of the student on an IEP. What could possibly keep them from sharing this information with the school team? Teachers have years of training to educate our students, so why would they have any barriers? Unfortunately, as we're going to discuss, there are many barriers that both of them may face. General educators often have limited knowledge of various disabilities. Our colleges and our universities, they tend to focus on the general population when educating our future teachers. And therefore, many general ed teachers only have about 1 to 2 semesters of training on how to work with youth with disabilities. All adults in the IEP meeting or other school activities may focus on the deficit of the child rather than the strengths. For instance, Bobby may have a sensitivity to loud noises and then engage in behaviors. So the school team decides not to send him an invitation to the football pep rally. A better way to approach this would be to look at how Bobby would be able to participate. What would make it successful for him? And then sending that invitation indicating that he would be provided with the headphones that he needs or would be able to sit close to the door to easily remove himself if the noise became too overwhelming. Like the general educators, parents are often not well versed in special educational law. This can make them feel less than confident in speaking up during the meetings or advocating for their child to participate in activities that the typical peers engage with both inside and outside of the school. A huge barrier for many school districts is when there is a cultural difference or a language barrier. Our approach to the world is not a one-size-fits-all, and learning to proactively engage in acceptance of cultural and diverse differences as a pillar for growth can truly benefit the students within the school. A few other concerns are the lack of training that staff may have on how to engage families. I'm not talking about the parent-teacher conferences, but rather to truly engage families in all that they can do to enrich the school culture. Both adults and students struggle with the lack of time to prepare for meetings or activities in an inclusive manner. The student may feel as if they might miss an important class time, and therefore they have to work even more to get caught up. Students on IEPs are already working harder to succeed, so this concept can be quite overwhelming for them. Teachers, parents, and students may have also had negative experiences previously, and it's hard to let that experience not cause heightened anxiety when they're walking into a new meeting. Additionally, we often have created a passive role for the student in the meeting. The meeting is about them, and their voice should be the loudest. We can and we must change this if we want them to be engaged in their educational journey. Finally, peer pressure, the lack of knowledge about their disability, and sometimes their outright refusal to identify with their disability can all lead to barriers for the student to truly lead their education journey. So as you see, there are many barriers. We hope through today's session, you're going to learn ways to navigate through them. Monica, could you share with us about the students and how they can be a valuable contributor to special education evaluations?
Thank you, Dee. So as we move to our next slide, we are going to discuss how do we prepare students for the evaluation process? How do we include student voice in this process? Well, first things first, we want to make it a student-friendly interaction based upon their level of understanding. So, of course, it would not be advisable to lead in with, we are conducting a multi-factor evaluation, which will include many data observations. That language can be overwhelming at any age. And so how can we break that down for the student to help them understand what this process looks like? Many of us have had situations where we've gone to a doctor's office or an appointment, and they're explaining results or lab information to us, and we're sitting there listening for root words, trying to figure out how can we can decipher that conversation. So just imagine a student if we lead in with evaluation team report, a comprehensive report. So we want to break it down for the student and feed it to them in ways that is digestible for them. Think about when we got our children off of a bottle. Hopefully we didn't go straight to meat and potatoes, but we started off with some softer ways to gently guide them into a different language, a different way. And so the next thing we want to consider is avoiding acronyms, avoiding jargon. Did anybody catch on the slide what I did? I used an acronym right off the bat, ETR. If you caught that, give yourself a pat on the back because that was intentional. So we want to avoid using jargon, acronyms, ETR, IEP, BIP, SDI. What does that do for the student? It helps them understand what this conversation is about. So explain the evaluation team report in a way that is digestible for the student. We also want to think in terms of when we discuss with students and parents what LRE means. We all know what LRE means, but how about breaking down what least restrictive environment actually means? And it's really just a fancy way of saying we're going to educate a child with a disability to receive the most appropriate education designed to meet their needs in an environment that is the least restrictive. Now, a first grader is not going to be able to digest that. But if we can come up with our creative terms to help them understand, make it student friendly. Some other things that we can do is conduct a student interview. Johnny, can you tell me some things that are really easy for you to do? Johnny, can you maybe share some things with me that are a little challenge for you? How do you go about dissecting a large task? Here are some examples of some things that we're going to use during your evaluation. Sort of giving them a brief little quick intro, hearing their insight, hearing what their opinions are. Maybe you want to play a game with Mrs. McCain. Here's some options. Here's some things that we're going to try. Another thing that we can do during the evaluation process is introduce the team players ahead of time. What does that do? It helps them feel more comfortable. All of us have gone into work one day and seen a bunch of people that we've never seen before. And your first thought may be, who are these people? What are they doing here? We get skeptical. So imagine a student walking into a room with a bunch of professionals. So just sort of introducing who the team players are, it builds some familiarity. You may not understand what the evaluation is, but at least you're doing it with some people who don't appear to be strangers. And when it comes to the results, share with the students. We're going to be in a room with a whole lot of people. There's going to be a lot of paperwork. There's going to be a lot of talk about data. and just really share with the student, this is what we're doing. Let's lead in with their strengths. Let's lead in with their preferences. And let's have that conversation with the child, with the parents, in a way that's digestible for the entire team. So as we progress to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about student voice and the IEP process. So I need you all to put on your thinking caps for this really quickly. Some of us may have to think back 30 years, some of us 40 years, some of us maybe even 60 years or more. But think about when you first learned how to ride a bike. You can give me a thumbs up on your screen with the reactions, or in the chat if you remember when you first learned how to ride a bike. My memory is very vivid because I had a strawberry shortcake bike, was my first bike. It had a basket, it had streamers. I mean, my first bike was sharp. So think about when you first learned how to ride a bike. And so with that experience, I see some yeses, some thumbs up in the chat. So when you think about that experience, from my experience, at first, my dad held on completely to the back of my bike. Sometimes he would hold on to just the handlebars. Other times he would hold on to both the handlebars and the back seat to sort of make sure that I was stable. And sometimes he walked alongside me at first. So gradually, as I learned how to ride that bike, he would move further and further away in small distances, staying within reach to help me in case I needed him or in case I lost my balance. But eventually I was able to steer that bike on my own. So if we think about our students' journey in the same way as we think about learning how to ride a bike for the first time, we've all had that experience. We can guide our students through the IEP journey in a similar fashion to our first experience with learning how to ride a bike. So how do we do that? Information is key. Maybe provide an age-appropriate checklist for the student. Maybe we tell them about the components of the IEP ahead of time in a way that they can understand it. Maybe we talk about the requirements for a transition plan if this is an older student. Research shows that there are many great outcomes when we include student voice. It builds their self-advocacy skills. It builds confidence. It helps them to link their learning to the IEP. The things that you're working on with the intervention specialist or in the resource room, this is how it connects to your IEP meeting. This is how it connects to your learning. Maybe the daily tasks and skills that you work on with your paraprofessional, it helps them connect those dots and links the learning to what we're talking about in that big, overwhelming meeting. And in turn, what does that do? It builds our capacity to support the student. We all have the same goal in mind, and that's student success. So why not have the student at the forefront of those conversations? And research shows when students are present in the IEP meeting, team members increase their engagement. Team members are more intentional, about discussing student data from an asset-based approach as opposed to a deficit-based approach. Perspectives are shifted at both ends of the table. So students become not just the owners, they become owners, they become more than participants, and it benefits both student, parents, and the teams. I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Susan, and she's going to walk us through more of student voice in the IEP process.
Thank you so much, Monica. One of the things that we think about about the IEP process, of course, is what are all of these people coming to the table for? Well, they're coming for the student, to empower the student and make sure that the student is successful. But oftentimes, we don't always know what suggestions during an IEP meeting, without the student's input, what could possibly work or not work. Sure, we have a lot of things that track the students, but in the end, having them at the meeting, sometimes the students are able to say, I've already tried this. This works. This doesn't. Or you just learn things that you didn't even know the student had. Maybe they're the masters of their education. So maybe there's things that they know that we just around the table haven't learned yet. Again, it just emphasizes why it's so important to have the students at the meeting. The other thing is actually engaging with them in the meeting and saying, what do you want to improve on? Questions like that can lead to a more positive meeting than something negative. Again, we always need to think about the student's mental health before anything else. And so as a parent mentor, it's so important for me to understand that student and to show that student things prior to the meeting and after the meeting. The check-ins with the students are going to be vital. It's not just the meeting itself. It's that relationship building before we get into the meeting and after. That is what's going to make our students comfortable with admitting when things are hard, admitting when this didn't work, even though it's in my IEP. So as far as what we can do to make sure they understand their IEP is some of the things we've already heard today. Avoiding the acronyms, making sure that based on the evaluation, we are talking to them at their developmental level, not above it. Again, they need to be successful. They are the ones that need to work on these goals. So if we want them to succeed, we need to make sure we are talking at their developmental level. Another thing that happened to me, and it was actually after I became a parent mentor, I had spent a long time, and when I say a long time, years, just trying to research and learn so much as a parent about this individualized education process. So I would soak up all these nights of, research here, research there. As my son was in school, struggling and things like that in grade school. And then it was time to bring him in to his first IEP meeting. And I can remember as a parent feeling a little nervous about that. And I probably told his intervention specialist that too. But that meeting that I brought my son into for the first time definitely changed how I'm a parent mentor. So let me give you a quick example. He had already had, as an accommodation, tools and resources for him had already been listed, a graphic organizer. So we're going through the meeting. I'm sitting next to my son. People think people around the table have joked that I was the IEP guru. And I look at my son when I hear them say graphic organizer, and I said, do you know what a graphic organizer is? And he's blank face, says no. Now, this is something that's been on my son's IEP as long as I can remember. Several school years. So we all broke it down. And that was such an eye-opening moment, like so many of us parent mentors have. And once I realized that, I was like, okay, if we need our students to be successful, we have to make sure they understand these words we use for their accommodations and modifications. When we say, you get extra time for a test, we need to really break that down as to what that looks like, not just extra time on a test. And I am sure today, if you go into your next meeting and you have included the student, you will see by asking them questions like this, you learn so much about them that you didn't know, even if it's your own child. And you can all laugh at me for not knowing that about my son. But it really did. He not only changed the tune of his meeting, he changed it for all the students I now work with, because I make sure they know what their tools and resources mean. So those are definitely ways we engage students asking them questions and breaking it down. If I could go to the next slide, transition. Transition is always a huge topic, and it does start with a conversation. It starts with a conversation with our families. It starts with a conversation with our student. For example, with transition, it's what do you want to do? What do you enjoy? Maybe it's not even what do you want to do. Maybe it's just as simple as what are you interested in? What are your favorite things at school? What comes easy to you? Those kinds of things. By asking the questions when we ask the questions with the student and the student's able to provide feedback, it makes the transition process so much easier for us to navigate, even if we are the parent of the child. We find out a lot by just simply asking the questions. So as far as transition goes, it's already can be a stressful time for the parents. So we as working with students, we really want to make sure that we make everyone comfortable, the parents, the students. And here's the thing, you might have a student that loves animals, and they might say that that's what they really enjoy. And when you think about that, if a student says to you that they love animals, they work with animals, but yet their developmental level has consistently stayed in a lower range, how are we going to set them up for success? Maybe we're not going to be talking about veterinarian school. Now, I'm not saying that I'm just saying we're mindful to empower these students. We need to be mindful when we're talking to them and say, you know what? Every vet needs vet techs. Do you know what a vet tech does? Simple things like that, so that we're not canceling out anything. We're not saying that, the only thing for animals is a veterinarian. No, we need to be broad about it and really think about what they like, what they want to do. And then we work with our resources and we find what works and how they can move forward. So as far as transition, it's such a big time in life, but really, who's the expert on their transition? It goes back to the student. And so having those meaningful conversations make all the difference. And I cannot say that enough. And another thing, after transition meetings, which can be stressful, or individualized education plan meetings, or evaluation meetings. Something so important that I do is when I walk out of that meeting, well, actually, sometimes, to be honest, you kind of have to catch the student because, like we've learned, sometimes it's not in the best time for them, so they're racing back to class. But I will say, hey, how are you feeling? How did how did the meeting go? That follow through. That yes, we started prior to the meeting with the student, but after the meeting, I'm going to check in with them. I want to make sure that they feel empowered to go back to class. I don't want a student feeling less than. So that follow through is really important after any type of meeting. And now I am going to turn this over to Monica.
Actually, you're going to turn it over to Dee.
About that, Dee?
Monica, I look great today, don't I?
Beautiful.
Well, thank you, Susan. Such great information. If we combined all of that has been stated over the last several minutes into some concise bullet points, we would come up with the ones listed on the slide in front of you. If we empower the student, the family naturally becomes empowered as well. There are 4 foundational concepts that we can build a foundation upon to make a difference, to truly embrace the student as the voice for their education. First, as previously mentioned, the IEP is a tool, one that many students have never been taught how to use as a way to build the future that they want. We should make time to ensure that our students understand their IEP and how the strengths and the needs that this document identifies can benefit them, especially in regards to advocating for themselves. From the top level of administration down, we can cultivate a school-wide culture of the student voice being valued and that the student and their family are treated as equal members of that student's team. That is not often the case. Many times families come to the table and they're hesitant to speak anything because the experts are all there. No, the experts of the children are their actual parents. Each of our students are unique. They communicate in different ways, and it's imperative that we consider their skills and their developmental level when engaging them in conversations. Encourage them to make suggestions, ask questions, participate in their goal development. They have a vision for their future, and we need to respect that vision. They also know what bothers them most about their disability, and showing them that we hear them, and we want to help them become stronger in areas that they are most concerned about increases their buy-in and their motivation towards achieving their goals. Finally, embrace the family's fund of knowledge. Embrace it as the foundation of all family engagement. As each member of the school team has their own identity based on their skill set and their expertise, so does each of the family members. Valuing this expertise, their culture, their religion, their knowledge, by valuing this, it empowers the family member and it builds confidence. More importantly, it builds a more collaborative team, and it leads to a natural increase in family engagement because they recognize that they are considered truly a team member. Monica, can you share with us a tool that maybe you found helpful in using when you're empowering students?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dee. So one of the tools that I find useful that I share with parents and team members all the time is charting the life course. In particular, charting the life course offers so many tools to help plan for the future at any stage of life, regardless of ability. I think it's important to note that about charting the life course. One of the tools in particular is the portfolio sheet. The portfolio sheet asks the student, what is important to me as I'm getting ready to leave high school versus what do others think is important to me? As Susan alluded to in the last slide, parents and educators, we all have our ideas about what is important, but the student voice is crucial. And so that portfolio sheet helps them decide, hey, this is what's important to me. This is what other people think is important to me. And that helps the parents, team members get that juxtaposition and say, hey, I thought that was really important. But she's saying, this is not what's so important to me. That particular portfolio also goes on to ask the student to list what helps them be successful and list what does not help them to be successful. And so, again, asking those questions to the student, getting those internal thoughts out of their head, putting it on paper so that everyone understands this is what's important to me. And I think it's important to note that growing up is a long process. It's fluid, it changes. Some of us are still figuring out what we want to be when we grow up. So it's important for the student to know that this does not have to be solved in a 30-minute conversation. Growing up is a long process, and these tools with Charting the Life course offer a great framework to help parents and students. And so with respect to some of our students who may be lower incidence, like my son, for example, cannot articulate what a good life looks like for him. It gives me the tools as a parent to help that internal dialogue and to help share with the team. This is what success looks like for my son. These are the things that will help support his life. So the Life Course portfolio tools are an excellent tool. I recommend them. They're the gift that keeps on giving in any setting, and they're perfect for students, excellent for parents who also have to help their students determine what a good life looks like for them. So thank you, Dee, for allowing me to share that.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. So thank you. Susan, I'm sure you have maybe a success story of your own. Could you share with us about a strategy that you've used to empower students?
Yes, I think really the most important strategy I've learned is the relationship I am building with that student, so that after the meetings, if when I'm able to ask them, how do you feel? How do you feel? Because how they feel is more important sometimes than what the goals and some of the other things that are important part of their individualized education plan. But we all know that we need those connections and relationships, and all of us need help from time to time. I know I do with technology. So being able to have that relationship with the parent mentor, when I walk into a school building and I will have a couple other students, this happened the other day. Hi, Miss Susan. Hi, Mrs. Sweeney. They feel comfortable because I've made sure it's okay to tell me if it's hard. It's okay. It's okay to tell me that something I mentioned didn't help you. We will keep working at this. That relationship piece I use as the largest strategy probably I could ever speak on in this position.
Wow, absolutely. Thank you, both Monica and Susan, for sharing. While I'm getting ready to move on to the next slide, I'd love to hear from you, all you participants. Can each of you enter a strategy or a tool that you have used to increase student engagement using the link for the Jamboard in the chat? We'd love to learn from you too, and we plan to share that information in a little bit. There are a few other practical strategies to enhance student engagement that I'd like to share with you. These are based on the concerns and barriers that we previously discussed. Schools are systems, and systems tend to have a certain way of doing things. What we are recommending today is to take a close look at what we are doing and change just some of the most fundamental pieces of it. Consider if we schedule meetings when it best fits that student's schedule. They're not missing a chemistry class the day before a chemistry test, right? So we get input from them and we schedule it around their schedule. How impactful would that be in opening a door for the student to be able to participate and actually feel good about that? Considering the student's needs, when we're talking about having that meeting, how could we prioritize getting the information that is strength-based and the things that they do well, so that way that meeting is focused on those things, right? We know when we go into an IEP meeting, we're going to focus on the deficits. We recognize that. But why can't we have goals and meetings that talk about them using their strengths to increase their ability to cover those deficits? We need to be training our students on all the acronyms that we're using in meetings, not just our students, but our parents, right? What that meeting purpose is, making sure that they understand their rights, the students and the parents. We can hold practice meetings, and I strongly encourage, have some natural peer supports come in and practice with the student. Have peer modeling happen. This all engages that student in what they need and being able to share with that school team what they think they do well, what they think they need help with, and what their long-term plans are. Because their long-term plans, if it's not aligned with what our school plan is, we have failed that student. The other thing we can do is develop a plan and a culture of inclusiveness across all environments. Think about that strategic marketing that I talked about earlier. We need to take a look at the different opportunities that our school districts present for typical parents, typical students, and how do we make those more inclusive? Not just for those with disabilities, but those with various diversity, right? We want to bring our school districts together as a kind of a miniature world of collaboration. And finally, think about how we can support the families and the schools and the students in a collaboration of note-taking in a way of sharing their information. Charting the life course is a wonderful framework to be used to gather that information in a way that everybody's looking at it. It's not filled with acronyms. It is filled with potential opportunity. And it's focused specifically on that student, not on the system that is providing the supports for that student. Sorry, I have a little frog in my throat. So what we need to think about, what would my student need to feel not only comfortable attending the meeting, but also would make them feel valued. Monica mentioned earlier, or I think Susan mentioned earlier, about the mental health. We know that that is a huge concern in today's world. The last thing we want to do is increase the stress level on our students. So by helping them be more prepared, we are presenting them an opportunity to participate that is less anxiety provoked. We want their voice to truly be the voice of their educational journey. And together, we should be able to move forward collaboratively and collectively to make that difference by following some of these strategies. We can and we must do better. And I hope this session today has given you some ideas to put on your personal drawing board to consider as you endeavor to empower your students and thereby empowering your families. Dr. Johnson, would you like to take it from here?
We'll take it from here. I have to just pause and say, I know you all are thinking about how incredible it is to be surrounded by parent mentors and the work that they do and all of the practical strategies. I hinted at it at the beginning, but I hope you believe me now that they really are the experts about what this looks like for students and in practice. So kudos to my co-presenters. So we're going to open it up right now for questions. Feel free to unmute and ask your question, or you can drop it in the chat. And then we are going to actually take a look at you all strategies that you shared on the Jamboard with us before we head out, so we can kind of share some ideas. So I'll open it up for questions.
Well, I have something to offer while you may be thinking about your question you want to put in the chat. One of these strategies that I learned not in an education environment, I learned it from banking. So when I was in college, I was a bank teller. And one of the things that they taught us was how to deliver negative information in a positive way. And reason being, someone comes in and says, Monica, I want to withdraw $200. And the news is, you're overdrawn $40. I cannot give you $200. How do you deliver that message to the client without making them feel demeaned, without making them feel embarrassed? I use this strategy in education now. So the strategy is while I can't do this for you, here's what we can do. So just figuring out a way to take that negative piece of information, taking the sting out of it, and flipping it in a way to say, this is what we can do. So thank you to my bank teller years when I was in college, because I'm using it now in education. So just a little tidbit.
I love that, Monica. That is so good. So good. Okay, I'm going to put up the Jamboard. Hopefully you all can see what I see. And we did get some cool strategies listed up here. So I like the one, this sounds like kind of what we were talking about, the student-led IEP meetings. That's actually incredible. Those practice meetings that we were talking about actually would set a student up pretty well. So if that's something that you haven't tried previously, I think I've been a part of at least one student-led IEP meeting. And so that's an incredible opportunity. I love that. Teaching students what the word advocate means and how they can learn to advocate for themselves. Advocate for themselves with the team. Absolutely. Yep. Working to engage families prior to meetings to get their input before we sit at the table with the professionals. Absolutely. Yep. All of that pre-work. Even something I used to do as a school psychologist was to do just student interviews. That was a critical component of my report, that every time I'm having conversations with the student just about what they like, what are their preferences in general, even apart from, what was necessary for the special education process, just to get to know the student in their mind so that even if the student is, too young, the parent doesn't want them in the meeting, at least the student's perspective still makes it into the meeting by someone's account. So that's good to do. Have students explain what their strengths are and what areas they want to grow in order to emphasize that they do have strengths, and where they lack, there is always room to grow. Absolutely. Let the students know we, the team, are working with them to make sure the school is doing what we need to do to help them be successful at school. That's a very small, but such a powerful shift of conversation. That was one of the things I used to do it with families, is before we jump into the business of the meeting, right, and tackling the agenda, is to just bring everybody kind of to the same level. We are all here for the same goal, which is the student success and their ability to thrive in this environment. And so the same thing, you're right, the same thing can be said to the student prior to or while they're there, just to let them know, why are all of these people sitting around the table? We're here for you. We are maximizing all of our resources to make sure that you can be successful. So very small shift, but it definitely changes the tone in the room. Part of the life course, absolutely. There was actually a session earlier this morning that Dee was a part of, and we did share the link to that website for more resources if you're interested in learning what that is all about. But I would definitely recommend that as well. Yeah, personal interview, conversation about dreaming their future. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I shared this one yet. We've got a link. It says I use this with the videos. Let them recognize these and themselves. Can the person who added that one, can you tell us a little bit about what is that resource that you linked?
Yes. So that's one I got at a transition conference a couple of years ago. It's called I'm Determined, and it works with students on finding their pins. So I used it with 11th and 12th graders, and it was mind-boggling to me that the 11th and 12th graders couldn't tell me what their strengths were. They didn't think they had any. And that was heartbreaking. So this helps students. Hopefully I would use it with a much younger age to help them develop those strengths, to help them recognize their strengths, their preferences, their interests, and their needs.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And there's a link in the chat. Dee, do you want to go ahead and answer Wendy's question regarding strategies for students that are nonverbal or low IQ?
You must have a second set of eyes. You were watching that and the chat? I was like, what? Absolutely. So the question that Wendy asked about was strategies for students that are nonverbal or have low IQ. And when I'm working with, I have a lot of families. I work with families from preschool all the way through post-secondary. So I have several that use communication devices or are nonverbal in regards to the, and I'm changing my mindset to call them non-speaking, because one of the things that I've truly recognized is they do have thoughts and ideas about what they want done. And the way that I help parents understand it, I flat out say, did they have a behavior when you did something they didn't like? And they're like, yep. I said, they were able to communicate to you. They didn't like that, right? So sometimes when I'm working with a family who has a child that has a low IQ or has some communication issues, then what I do is I break it down to a way that they already communicate. It can be as simple as if I hand a kid a ball and they start bouncing it, we know that that's an interest. If I hand the kid the ball and they throw it away and sit down on the floor, that's not an interest, right? So it can be as simple as something like that to gather that information of where their interest lies and where it doesn't lie. For those who are able to point at visual icons, giving them a series of icons to choose from, right? Paying attention to what they do gravitate towards naturally in their environment. That gives us all kinds of information. Do they gravitate towards peers? If so, they are interested in social collaboration, right? And social interaction. If they tend to stay away from others, let's take a look at the environment. Is that environment too loud for them? If we remove some of the noise, would they engage with their peers? So we really need to pay attention to that environment and use the visuals that we tend to use with them on a day-to-day basis. But one of the biggest things that I have learned to love about charting the life course for this population of students is it can be hard for us to determine what they want. That is hard. But we know what they don't want. They show us that. There is no doubt in our mind if they don't like peas, right? We feed them peas. There is no doubt in our mind. They're going to spit them out. They're going to make the face, whatever. We know what they don't want. We know what they don't like. And so what we can do is build their capacity for things that they like by avoiding and being purposeful and planful about avoiding the things that they don't like. So a simplistic model of that would be if we know absolutely our kid cannot stand the smell of hamburger, we're not going to take them to McDonald's or Wendy's. We're probably going to take them to Pizza Hut. And so when we're compiling what their future life looks like, right? Restaurants would be included, but it would have some specific types of restaurants that we would want to avoid. So those are some of the ideas that I try to help families understand. And I take it down to the bare minimal in explanation like I just did with you guys. You know whether your kid will eat broccoli, right? If they don't like broccoli, then let's create a world for them that doesn't have broccoli. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit, but I'd be happy to turn it over to Susan and Monica, see if they have ideas as well.
Not necessarily an idea, but an example. I was in an IEP meeting just this week with a family of a little girl who has autism, and she's non-speaking. And it was something that the speech therapist and the occupational therapist shared that, hey, she loves music. And so we noticed that when we play music in the background, she's more apt to sign and engage with us. So sometimes it's just noticing their environment and noticing the things that they, have an affinity for, and including those things in interaction with the child. Because this little girl says, I love music. You're playing music. You got my attention. And so just noticing those little details that can help the student and the parent.
Fantastic. Well, we have 3 minutes left. I will move forward to this slide just so again you see our names. If you have any questions about today's presentation, feel free to send them to that seat-parentmentor@osu.edu. And if it's for any specific parent mentor, I will take on forwarding that along to make sure that they get your question or follow-up. But yes, I am so grateful for the opportunity to share these strategies with you all and for you all to hear from our parent mentors who I said are doing this work every day. So we hope that those learning objectives from the beginning are real for you now and that you're walking away with some practical strategies and feel more aware of how to incorporate student voice in the special education journey and family engagement.
Dr. Johnson,
Yes.
Linda Klump had put in the chat who is doing charting the life course with the student when you can't even get the parents to come to the meeting. So there's a couple of things I want to approach in that particular comment. Charting the life course is in collaboration now with the Department of Education as well. So we're doing our best to get people throughout the whole state of Ohio trained. SSAs have been trained as ambassadors. There was a group of parent mentors that were trained as ambassadors last year. I was one of those. And so we're getting it into the school buildings is what I'm going to say. So that way we can utilize it to work with that student. And the other thing I would say is when I'm thinking about student and family engagement, I try to identify what barriers are preventing that parent from coming to the meeting. So that way I can maybe try to work around those barriers. Maybe it's the time frame that I'm scheduled in the meeting. Maybe they've had 6 negative experiences in a row where they have felt less than valued or unheard. So maybe I set up a private meeting with them to make sure that they understand things, and maybe it doesn't look like the typical IEP meeting. So when I'm seeing parents not attending, I try to figure out what's the barrier and how do I work around that barrier. I think that's so important in order to increase that engagement, because also when parents are firmly not engaged, it is harder to get the student engaged because attitudes about things, they come out at home. It's as simple as that. And so we want to provide the opportunity to look into those true reasons why we don't have that engagement. So that way we can work through those barriers.
Absolutely. So good. Thank you all so much for your time today. We appreciate your participation.
Thank you all, and thank you to our presenters for sharing your time and knowledge and so many great personal stories. I'm going to walk away with a lot of ideas and strategies that I personally will apply. If everyone could take a moment, if this is your last session today, to complete the survey that we just dropped in the chat. If it's not your last session, make sure you do that before you leave for the day. We'll continue to put it in the chat at each session. You will need to complete that if you're looking for timing for hours and participation hours certification. So make sure you do that before your last session. You will have about a 15-minute break before our next session start at 2 o'clock. But thank you all so much for spending your time with us today, and a big shout out to our presenters. Thank you, everyone.